Hey guys, welcome back. This is the Co-Travel Podcast with Bob Piercy, and I'm really excited today to have Jennifer Buchanan on the show. Jen, thanks for doing this.
Oh, thanks for having me, Bob.
Now, Jen, you are, and please correct me if I'm wrong. I want to get the title right, but interior designer, space designer. What is what does a business card say?
Well, we'll get kind of a little bit more into that. I think on my legal letterhead, I'm a licensed interior designer. So I'm a part of different associations, the Architects Associations of Alberta, as well as the Interior Designers of Alberta. And so registered and licensed. Sounds heavily accredited. I think that's why I don't put it on my card. Um,
It sounds too formal.
Totally. It sounds way too formal, and that's just not really who I am. It's kind of like, oh, and you're that too. I kind of take that approach to it.
No, and I want to make, because we talked a lot about having you on, having the conversation, how we wanted to kind of structure this, and it's important because there's a lot of people in this kind of space, and there's a lot of not necessarily confusion or deception, but just a lot of unknown, I think, about people that air quotes like design stuff. And I want to back up though, like what got you into design? Like, how long have you been doing this, and like what kind of got you started in this down this road?
Oh, yeah. Well, I was always sort of like a kid who wanted to do everything. So design, how it sort of all came to be was I wanted to be an artist, and my immigrant parents were like, no, you're not going to be an artist. But design actually came, it was a recommendation from my art mentor at the time. So after I'd finished, excuse me, like high school and whatnot, I was doing some artwork, but also some like merchandising for West Edmonton Mall at the time, back when people kind of got a little bit more into displays and things. And I really enjoyed that. So just speaking with my art mentor, she encouraged me to just kind of look into interior design. And at the time it was, that's the problem with interior design is as a non-protected title, it could be so many things. I think at the time she was thinking decorating, and somehow I got into residential interior design before I went to formal school. And yeah, and then so at that point, I went to school and then discovered that I actually really liked commercial design. I think when I was younger, I always loved architecture, engineering, and stuff. And so naturally, I think I just kind of moved into the shoes that maybe I was always supposed to fulfill. But yeah, so art and engineering together, that's kind of how I got into it. And just being mentored by all the right people throughout my career, it just kind of almost kept me passionate about it as well. So yeah, that's
And, and
yeah.
and it checked the parents' box of approval for what you're allowed to do.
Sort of professional, but yeah, I think at the time they were just like, no, you can't be a starving artist.
It
And
wasn't doctor, it wasn't lawyer, but it had a designation, so you're good.
right, so they were okay with it. They're like, maybe you want to be an architect. I was like, no, this is good. But in any case, yeah, I just sort of through different opportunities, just like how interior design is an expression. So whether it's doing commercially or whatnot, sort of just kind of came to be, and in the different type of projects and stuff like that I started to get into, and
And how long
obviously
have you been in
limited
like
by.
the corporate professional world?
Yeah, so corporate interior design, I've been designing for 22 years.
Okay, wow. No, absolutely. And what type of projects have you worked on, like, before you kind of came into the dental industry?
Into the dental industry, yeah, so always commercial, like, and this is after sort of like my training, like formal education. Always commercial. I actually started strong in restaurant design. So hospitality, restaurant, I've done retail, but that was sort of a big thing for me, the hospitality and, designing spaces, yeah, that had a brand before brand was even sort of like a buzzword, just an aesthetic, right, where people could be. As we spend more time interiors wise, that was really important. But I think also too, that hospitality design exposure really helped me in terms of just planning and being passionate about workflow and serve. Like being in a service industry, you have to think about its efficiency quite a bit. And so being able to take that and bringing it into sort of my kind of dental, medical, all those sort of non-hospital type health realm was uh, was really beneficial.
So you just mentioned efficiency, in regards to design too. So I guess like where did you what's the purpose of good design? Because you talk about brand before brand was being a thing. You talked about efficiency just now. Like where does, in your mind, where does good design actually fall? What's the purpose of it?
Yeah, I think initially when a lot of people think good design, they often the mind goes aesthetic. The minute the word design comes out, people think, oh, aesthetic, right? And especially now with social media and stuff like that, I think that's something that everyone's brain goes to. Good design, bad design again. While we're always like thumbs up, thumbs down, we live in that sort of realm now. I think there's always good, better, best is almost a better way to approach it. There's always good processes and bad processes, and then the aesthetics support sometimes or are a part of a branch of it almost, right? And so, um, yeah, definitely good design. That one, yeah, it's a really tough one. I think I still sort of lend myself to the good, better, best scenario, right? So processes. Let's just talk about why. I guess we're chatting. We talked about I'm sorry, Bob.
No, it's okay. No, hey, I can tell just by hearing your voice that you've got so much to say on this topic, and you know so much because we've had conversations like this for years, and but also you're passionate about it. Like you really are, and we've talked about things where it's just become like there's so much out there that we just don't know. I don't know, and like we don't know about design. And people get so confused on like the price of a quote. Why does this design quote cost X? Why does another quote cost more? Like what's going into it? And I guess like you talked about function in a dental in a restaurant. So obviously it needs to look good, needs to be appealing, it needs to speak to the customer, to the audience that you're trying to bring in, but also
Yeah.
it needs to function because people need to bus tables and cook food and create an ambience and a flow. And I'm assuming, I'm just guessing that like you can have something that looks great but it's completely unfunctional as a space.
Right. Yeah,
And
or those design decisions made the project really costly that yeah, just and that stuff. I think honest good design always starts with a good plan. And historically, yeah, that does mean like a good floor plan, but it also means a good logistics plan too, right? Like how is this carried out? What is the day-to-day flow of the front end? What kind of visual cues do I have? And how does that support the back end? A lot of things like that. And so, I think that's what I meant in terms of like how working in hospitality kind of supported just how I slice out a floor plan in terms of, what is the flow end, front end, not just always the back end too, right? And so so I think good design is that it's aesthetics but also logistics too, right? Especially in the realm of like renovations. I mean, we did a clinic once where the client wanted to expand, build a mezzanine and renovate. So like all of that happened and then he only wanted to be shut down for a week. um
so also good design also is like instilling expectation, reasonable expectation in terms of project scope too.
Yeah, good design too is also being like, okay, hey, maybe 1 week is not realistic, or okay, if you want that, then logistically on the plan, we're gonna have to plan it this way so that we have a swing space in order to create, breakthrough, expand, renovate. Like, where do we move people? It becomes a logistics plan, not just oh, here's a space fit. Like I think I hear that a lot, like lease assist, space fit. Things like that, and those are great useful tools for assisting with a lease. But sometimes if the end user wants much more than that, then there has to be a lot more thought and consideration into that. Especially, and that's an extreme example of the expansion, mezzanine, renovation, all in 1 week downtime. But mind you, we did it.
Okay, so you did it. You actually, and
Yeah,
so by breaking up the demolition and you broke it into pieces and chunks and you kind of planned it, strategized it. You actually did that. Wow. Okay. Um,
yeah.
how long have you been in the dental industry, the dental space now?
Oh boy. Um, I would probably say about 10 to 12 years.
Okay.
So the firm I was working for at the time, so I've been on my own as Jennifer Buchanan Interior Design for about 10. And so, but yeah, I did a couple of clinics while employed with someone else. And so it sort of really just kind of rolled into more. And so full time, probably about 10 years.
And what about the dental space? Did you learn, or did you learn quickly, like under fire, as like what's different about designing for dental as opposed to say a restaurant? Because both places would have like people coming in, people being seated, people moving around. Like there's similar attributes to a restaurant as a dental clinic, Like what's kind of what kind of opened your eyes and kind of made you go when you kind of got into the dental space design?
Yeah, I think just for me, it's probably just being able to the integrated process of having everybody come together. Because I think the success of a dental build is really about the team that you put forth. Right? There's a lot of moving targets and they're constantly moving. It's not like, hey, there's a moving target, we got it. It's like, okay, well, we made that decision. What are the ramifications of that decision and how do we work around that? Because everybody's practice, everybody's approach is slightly different. And so being able to design to that and what the expectations or the hope for is addressed, I think is really important. Yeah. So dental, I think because there's a lot of those moving, like again, while I'm an artist, at heart, there is a part of me that's almost like an engineer at brain too, in the sense of like, oh, how does that all come together, and where should we run conduit? How do we future proof that so that nobody's calling asking for a data run, because like how do we incorporate that better design, right? And so that's where it's good to have a good plan. It's better to address like all these questions, and so I really make sure that everybody is brought to the table almost at the beginning, not in this sort of like waterfall process of like, okay, here's my plan. Now you get to no, I in the planning, I engage with people much like yourself to say, hey, like this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? And yeah, and then we have this roundtable conversation, and I think that is better design. And again, and now with COVID and everything like that, bringing the engineers not at the 75% mark of my drawings, but at the beginning, at the lease.
um, so you talked about this kind of like the process. Like, what type of philosophy do you try to bring to each job? Like, does that change depending upon the industry? Is your philosophy in dentistry different than say in residential or commercial? But what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I've had this. So recently I worked actually on an optometry clinic because my portfolio digitally strongly presents dental. But I mean, I do kind of operate, and I had one doctor. She asked me, she's just like, "Well, you do a lot of dental, but can you do an optometry clinic?" And at the time, I told her, I just said, my design filter is the same regardless of your project. And while I only kind of do commercial, I try to really stay in that realm. I think for me, like my approach is really a balance between passion and integrity. So, yeah, I've thought about that and I was like, is that maybe not corporate enough to say that? But it truly is, right? Like examining what does that person want? What does the space demand of this process? Things like that. And yeah, so for me, again, touching back on the initial thing I said about hiring a designer who has certain credentials, licensed, registered, the accountability of different associations that do protect the general public is the integrity part of it, how you choose to conduct yourself business wise, but also the passion of like, what is that person, being able to extract what that person wants. I just finished talking to a doctor and he said to me at the start, and this is before COVID all happened, he said, Jen, I don't know what I want, but I know what I don't like. I'm like, like that is often sometimes what I've got to work with, other than what the space will tell me, and that, he wants a successful practice. I'm like, oh, okay, you don't know what you want. So just really being able to listen to what that person's almost not saying too. So I think that's where the passion comes in. It's not necessarily like fire, but just being a good listener and having that other person's best interest at heart. Like I told one client too, I just kind of said to him, I just said, I'm like the consultant you hire to be your friend through the process, right? Like, that friend you call up and you want their opinion, like, hey, what do you think about this? But if that person is like, like on a search engine 16 down, is that person's opinion really worth it, right? It's a valued, educated opinion. So that's where I think the passion comes in. It's like, no, don't do that. You should, because you have this, and this, and you're up against this and this, just helping to navigate that person through that, because a lot of times every project is different, right? So whether it's timeline, budget constraints, space constraints, I've got to work with this group of people, right? And their significant others, and it's like, oh, okay, right? Like all those different challenges, right? That carve out how the project will be executed.
Well,
So that's, yeah, you
no,
do this a lot.
it's and we've talked about design a lot, and I think everyone has an interest in design. I know I do, and I'm not saying I'm any good at it, but I've got an interest in it. Um, But we've also talked, there's kind of been a joke around the office kind of since I started, where you could walk into a dental clinic and you could pick out which designer or who designed the clinic. And
Oh,
and you're and we, I know you and I've discussed this too, and like that's obviously based on what you just were talking about, extracting and knowing what questions to ask, and like that's obviously an example of not good design in my opinion, because you're seeing the designer in the building and in the space, and not the owner, whether that's the dentist or optometrist or whoever the space is for. Like you want to extract that person so that they are represented in their space and not necessarily you.
right. And what that doctor hopes to accomplish by, like, to take it one step further, we're designing for your patients, right? Like, and that whole experience of, yeah. So yeah, they go hand in hand 100%. And I agree with that. There are some times when I walk in and I'm like, wow, that is like, you know, I've had some people say to me like, "Hey, just design the space so that you get like a couple of good shots, good magazine shots." And that's bad design. I'll
Mhm.
tell you right there. I just was like, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, it should be more than what a snapshot could be worthy of on social media or magazine. It's got to be way more than that, And so while there are some spaces that I feel I've designed that are, that snapshot photo, at the same time, what does the rest of the clinic do to support the staff, the patients, the longevity of the clinic, both in aesthetic, also in flow and technology? There's so many things to think of. And that's why hiring somebody with the right filter, education, experience, so that was one thing too, where it was just like, do you call yourself a dental designer? And I think we've chatted about that, where I've sort of just cringed when somebody says that to me. It's just like, well, I'm a designer who works in the space of dental, in the sense that sometimes just having that title to some people automatically makes them an expert. And I think that's also another, we'll add that to the bad design column. Being a
and
self-proclaimed like qualifier.
um yeah, and sorry, it just kind of I lost my train of thought for a second, but
Sorry,
no, no,
we're just rambling now at this
it's
point.
fine. No, no, this is I'm sure it'll come back. But we're talking about like the idea of like air quotes like interior design is appealing to almost everyone. Like I said, I think it's cool, but I'm not necessarily good at it, and I think I should thank you for showing me that I'm not good at it over the years. Um,
Sorry, but you're welcome.
but a lot of people could just think like, oh, how hard could it be, and like how many doctors spouses or friends or family or children or just people who just want to like get the opportunity, like in the case of like how hard could it be, how hard is design like really, and but what don't people know about design that someone in your position with your training and designation do know, that actually like where's that gap, how big is that gap?
I think it could be quite big. As much as a 30-minute HGTV show wants to show you and wrap it up by all their sponsors. Again, we'll add that to the bad design list. Not that, I mean, those are worthwhile shows, but again, not everything is that. And there are some things that are worth being exposed. But at the same time, I'm sorry, your question was, I'm going rambling. You're talking about
Basically,
just,
what do you know about design that others don't? Like what goes into like again under the floors, behind the walls,
yeah.
that's functional, practical, that's aesthetic. Where like where is it that that you fit versus someone like myself who again watches HGTV or something like that, that thinks
Oh,
I could do that.
sorry.
Like
Sorry, Bob.
you're
Yeah,
picturing me watch
there was
HGTV right now with popcorn.
well, I get that. That sounds like a great Tuesday night. But in any case, yeah. Well, Bruce Mao, there's a quote that really resonated with me a long time ago, and it just Bruce Mao had said, "Design is invisible until it fails." And
Oh, I like that.
it just, to me, it really challenged me earlier on in my career to be like, "Hey, look at all the things that you can't see." Because I think everyone is mesmerized, especially in the world of Instagram now. Everyone's mesmerized by a photo and a moment of visual like spotlight and stuff like that. But it is a lot of work in terms of just and again, I had one guy say to me, like, for me, lighting is really important. He also said, this one contractor said to me, "I get why you fight for your lighting package." He's like, because the clinic feels differently. I think now, especially that we're spending more times indoors and things like that, that's really important. But that comes with a wealth of knowledge in terms of like LED, quality of LEDs, light tuning. There's so much there. There's a huge, again, it's always a good, better, best. I mean, at the end of the day, knowing also when to stop, like a good piece of art. So I'm an artist as well. It's just sometimes you just gotta, like, I literally physically at the end of painting something will drop my paintbrush and say, that's enough. And sometimes in design it has to happen that way too, right? Because the sky is not the limit, budget and space wise, right? And so you need to be able to drop your brush, so to say, and say, okay, that's enough. Like, yes, I know that we can buy this, but what will that look like maintenance wise for the doctor? What will that look like with controls? All those sorts of things. And so huge in terms of like the jump. So investing in learning, I think, yeah, a lot of people think it's just picking materials and finishes and stuff like that, but there's so much more to that. Time management is huge, just being able to understand, especially in the commercial realm, right? Like we don't have unlimited time, right? Like the fixturing period starts here, we have this amount of construction. So what are you selecting in terms of like products that are available locally, right? With the pandemic, questions of, hey, we should start sourcing stuff locally. Well, you know what? I've sort of already been doing that when the dollar changed probably about 5 years ago, right? And just making those pivotal changes so that my spec and supply line in terms of what I was specifying for my clients was cost effective in terms of the US exchange, but also is that product manufactured here in Canada? Things like that. I think that's, again, we'll add that to the good design list in terms of process. So yeah, time management is huge. Being able to, yeah, just kind of align everybody so that, yeah, you need good organizational skills. I think.
Absolutely. And so you touched on that on this this next question already, but I want to go into it more. Like really, like there's a value in everything, and there's a value in good design. There's also a cost of bad design. Like what
Mm,
is that cost? And it's specifically in the dental industry, like what is that cost? You talked about fixturing periods. You talked about source materials. Like really, like and um, where does that? Yeah. Sorry, the question is
yeah,
what's the cost
yeah.
of bad design?
Well, a lot of times it's like there's the aesthetic, sometimes like, well, that's an interesting choice. But there's also like where to spend your money. Do you spend it everywhere? But there's a lot of infrastructure, as you say, building a dental clinic specifically, right? There's a lot of infrastructure and knowing what's out there for equipment and almost reverse designing it, right? Like and making the proper decisions, right? Does that doctor own the space? Because sometimes we would make different decisions, I think, maybe with vac systems and stuff like that, pending, right, what the building does for the end user, aka the doctor owns the building, right? We would make different decisions. So again, those are life cycle costs that could compound. I had one doctor, so as I touched on, I've been doing dental design and dental for about 10 years. And I remember one doctor who owned his space, he's just like, I don't want expensive lights. I just want to, and at the time fluorescent was still around and LED was still not as readily available. It wasn't as cost effective. People thought it was almost more of a special order item. And I said, no, no, like you own your space. You shouldn't, from a utility standpoint, right? You shouldn't be putting in fluorescent. Like, where are you going to get these lamps? Like, 5 years from now, they're going to be obsolete and controls. And now as we're kind of rolling into the new national energy codes and things like that, right? Like we need LED in order to meet those controls and the dimming and all that stuff. It is a gamut of knowledge. And so it's just, as one dear friend said to me, you just don't know what you don't know.
Yes.
So being able to hire the right person, the right professional to guide you through that. One thing I wanted to touch on too is, people in the self-qualified dental designer realm is, oh yeah, I design dental clinics all day long. And lo and behold, I find that this person potentially who I'm competing with, only picked finishes for a dental clinic. That doesn't make you a dental designer, right? Like, what do you know about lead and shielding and all those sorts of things, right?
Okay, so uh, if I'm a doctor and I'm looking to design a space, like what are the different titles of dental designers out there? What's the spectrum from my someone I know who wants to who wants to pick colors, but what are the actual designations from interior designer? A designation like yours, like are there how many 5, 6, 10 options for me to choose from that I think is all the same thing. I don't realize the differences. Like how many different, classifications of designers out there are there?
Right. And interior design, you should understand, is not a protected title.
Okay,
So anyone
what does
who,
that mean? What does protected title mean?
well, again, like an engineer, and if he finishes his education, a certain amount of training, he ends up with a stamp. So if a certain body of work requires professional involvement, they have that stamp. And so interior designers fall into, in Alberta anyways, we fall into the Architects Association. Now, again, I don't want to just say, hey, you need, because I think it should be a balance of both, right? Because there are lots of people who are highly accredited who maybe aren't suitable in terms of the execution of the aesthetics of the clinic, right? It really should be both, um, in my opinion. And again, there's no good or bad, right or wrong, good, better, best, right? And so I think that the value to having a licensed interior designer or a registered interior designer involvement in your project is that they're a part of associations who keep them accountable, much like a doctor who requires continuing education units, right? So what we all knew about LED 10 years ago is very different now, coupled with controls and stuff like that. That comes through a gamut of continuing education as, embodied by our associations. However, I still think there is value in intertwining with somebody who has that passion for aesthetics and how things come together. For me, while I'm also an engineer nerd, I also am a bit of a construction nerd. I like to build stuff with my sons and my family, you know what I mean? And we kind of work with our hands a lot. My husband's a farm kid, so passion and how that all comes together. So that's still important. I don't want to just make this blanket statement saying everybody has to be this, but I think you can't. I think I would caution people on, if your designer took a weekend course online for 25 bucks through, like, it's just like, ugh, that's the person you don't want to hire, right? Because it's technically not the qualifications that you need to build a successful practice, my
Well, and
opinion.
on a different tangent or analogy for dentistry too is like, one thing we discuss a lot about is lease negotiations on the actual
Mm,
space itself, and how important
mhm.
a lease is for a dental office. Because if you are almost, so many other businesses, if the lease goes bad, you could pack up one night and ship out and be set up, across the street.
Right.
Worst case, like you can do that. But with dentistry, there's so much hidden infrastructure, in the
Yeah.
floors, in the walls, in the ceilings, that really, it takes 6 to 8 months to build out a space, as you know better than I do.
Yeah.
And, so really making sure that the lease is important and done properly so that you, the dentist, have options and choices and aren't being pigeonholed is so vitally important. And on the design side of things, like you say, if something's missed, like, if you don't core a floor properly, if the diameter on a suction system isn't appropriate, and it's like that's, and then you put the cement down, then you put the flooring on it, then you put the walls and the chairs, like that's a big mistake, that, and an expensive mistake to fix.
Hmm.
And when those happens, most offices just end up limping along for for the lifespan of that office, because it's not worth it to go back and fix it. But now every single day is a struggle because the design
Right.
wasn't done properly.
Oof. Yeah, and you're right. 100% of the bloodline of a clinic is what you don't see. Hence, design is invisible until it fails. But yeah, a lot of that infrastructure is in the walls and that and in the ground and yeah, they should really be there to support the tools that support the doctor and the efficiency, and therefore having just being able to have like a great ergonomic, not even just workflow physically in terms of how people move space to space, but also just being able to have that right infrastructure to support the tools within the operatory to be able to support the doctor's comfortability, like, as I age, I'm kind of like, okay, right. Like I do need that chair with all the bells and whistles. That's important. So I can imagine it's almost so much more in dental, right? Yeah.
um, what are some of the weird, like, design, and again, it's everything's for the person, and it needs to work for the doctor, for the client.
Mhm.
What are kind of some of the weird design knickknacks you've had to kind of incorporate into a space, dentistry or not, that,
Oh,
but again, it's that person needed that thing, and it was just, I'm just kind of, I'm putting you on the spot here. I apologize, but just kind of
no, that's okay. I'm trying not to, because one thing I do pride myself on is client confidentiality.
fair
So
enough.
gotta make
Yeah.
sure I'm
So
not
let's.
incriminating anyone. I've had design. That's a really funny question, by the way.
So I was in a
Uh,
design course in the U.S., and
yeah, yeah.
apparently some dentist in the U.S. required he wanted to have a hot tub in his dental clinic. and that was one of the must-haves that was on the list that he just, and so anyways, but he needed
Yeah,
the hot
I've
tub.
incorporated a pirate ship into pediatric. I think pediatrics is kind of where we have fun, and I've done a couple of pediatric clinics here in the city, and we have fun. Like we theme it. It's like, okay, well, let's not go too hard because I think kids are, you know what I mean, and you don't want to have to maintain that. But pirate ship would probably go up there with weirdness as well as spaceship. But again, this doctor's really into the pediatrics. Yeah, and then I've had to design around this Greek goddess bodice. Again, I'm not saying that, and that's why I'm saying good design and bad design can't be an exercise of walk into a space and judging the aesthetics, because I don't know what that designer had to work with, and certainly I don't need anybody judging my pirate ship. So those are off the top are kind of, we have a lot of fun too. I think fun things to incorporate into the dental clinic are fish tanks. They're quite costly in terms of maintaining, however,
Mhm.
but they do bring a different vibe, right? I know that biophilia and wellness and the access to nature and how that makes, people feel in their spaces great. By the way, we love plants. I mean, I walked through an IKEA a couple of weeks ago, and literally like the plant area has exploded, and like 2/3 of it is artificial. So moss walls, living walls, those are all different challenges, right? And so, but those are all fun things that people have inquired to incorporate. I think if I'm going to put anything in terms of like bad, don't put this in your space, water walls. A long time ago, a lot of people wanted to put water walls in clinics, and they're just a nightmare to maintain.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like I tell most of my clients, it's not that you can't have it, but know what you're asking for,
Mhm.
not just in cost and in space, but also in what's this going to look like 3 years from now, and how much work are you willing to put into that?
The same design course I referred to earlier, as a pediatric office, and they put like a space shuttle in it,
Right.
apparently, and it had like a door at the bottom, and then it had ladders you'd climb up inside the space shuttle to sit in like the pilot's chairs looking up at the ceiling. And they,
Yeah.
apparently, within weeks they boarded it up because the hygienists were having to like climb in the space shuttle to come get the kids because the kids didn't want to get out. And so again,
Oh,
looked amazing, super fun, but in regards to running an efficient clinic, I'd put that in the bad design category as well. Just
right. Because guaranteed that the door into that spaceship was kid sized.
yes, yeah,
And I bet you that lady, or I shouldn't say lady, but I mean, like, I bet you that person went to go and retrieve the child to encourage them to now want to go see the doctor.
yeah, not so
Had to go
much.
through that kid sized door to get that.
But no, one thing too, like dental office designs have changed dramatically over the past, if you think back 20, 30 years, and there's some offices out there that are still like 20, 30 years old. You walk in, it's like 1978, but the feeling and the ambiance in clinics, and if you talk about living walls, and you talk about, you didn't mention sound, but I'm assuming sound and music in offices too is extremely important, and just that atmosphere to bring the heart rate down, because people are concerned about the dentist. It's not a place people love to go. But again,
Mhm.
that's all incorporated into proper design.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good point, Bob, in terms of like acoustics is huge, right? Like we went from open office, and now I think we're going to see a lot more closed. I think in the world of again, I've tried to balance my design in acoustics as best as I can, but the you have to pick what's the most important, and infection control isn't more important. So having washable X is important, and therefore we need to balance the soft surfaces elsewhere. So in a clinic and stuff like that, that's actually a constant probably issue to address. And while in a dental clinic, it's generally allowed. Um, kind of organization. Like
Mhm.
there's lots going on and stuff like that. It's not super quiet. At the same time, there's design considerations that need to be taken to help minimize that. Yeah. So whether it's spatial separation, or how can we help deaden the acoustics a little bit so that people who struggle with sensory and I think now again we're both plugged in.
Right.
We're gonna have this whole generation where we expect to hear everything like as though it's in our ears. And so yeah, I think, but again, like I say, acoustics is important, and that is an issue. There's tricks to address that, but at the end of the day, in a clinic anyways, I think the infection control part still has to trump, right? And we work around that.
Yeah, and I think too we're going to see a lot more closed operatories as well.
Mhm.
I was talking to a doctor a while ago, not very long ago, and the conversation came up where one patient was in the chair, and the patient was HIV positive,
Hmm.
and the doctor was talking, and then the patient next door made a comment to the hygienist or assistant that was with that patient, because
Wow.
they heard the conversation. And the open concept kind of came about because they're trying to fit more chairs in a space, and so there's more efficient use of space. But
Right.
then that obviously creates other concerns or other exposures in regards to aerosols, regards to voice, in regards to noise, and also it's just how the layout and the equipment that we're putting in the operatories is changing too. um,
Hmm.
and how there's being more, before, again, center islands, rear cabinets, side cabinets, and then now it's going to more like larger rear cabinets and walls for privacy and for acoustic, and just and again, we're trying to find that optimum balance between efficiency, and design, or efficiency and cost, and all those things
Right.
kind of you get put together in the puzzle piece that they are, and you end up with a dental practice, or you end up with a restaurant, or
Yeah.
you end up with
Right.
a space design. So no.
Yeah, I find too a lot of like design. So if we're gonna kind of go back to our first couple questions on good design versus bad design, often sometimes it's like regional. Like again, I've sat in some of these like CEUs where you have somebody maybe in kind of like the southern US who's saying this is what all my clinics look like, and they're very like homey looking, right? And so I'm not saying that's bad design, but regionally, I think they're encouraged to have. There was maybe a time period where people were encouraged to make, to minimize that anxiety or whatnot, to have your clinic feel like home. And so I think that's where a lot of that came from. But again, I don't think anybody really necessarily wants to have dental work, in their home or that. So I think while we want the warmth of a residential feel, and that welcoming, or maybe this is just my own philosophy now at this point, at the same time, we still want it to be clean, technologically driven, all those things, right? And so a good designer will be able to balance that for you. But yeah, sometimes when I look at some of these courses that are like dental design in southern US, and you look at the photos and it all looks like uh, a living room. Right, like it's very residential. I was like, ooh,
I haven't
that's
seen the
not
residential design yet. I've missed out on that one, but I've definitely seen some other designs that have made me question. But again, it's not my space. I don't, and the doctor needs to live in it, so the doctor needs
right.
to be comfortable in that space, because they're the one that's there the most. And another thing I've heard too is so many doctors want to put emphasis on the patient for the patient experience,
Hmm.
to lower anxiety. But at the same time, I think that that's important. But at the same time, don't forget that it's you and your team that are in that space the most. You guys need to operate in that
Yes.
space, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, sort of thing. And so whether that's the physical stress and fatigue it puts on your body because of how that place is laid out, with the number of steps you need to take from your office to take a pan to go to the operatory, like,
Yeah.
you really need to design the space for you first. And
Yep.
then I think honestly the patients come second, because again, they're there for a couple hours a year, and
Hmm.
compared to you being there 5 days a week, 4 days a week. So
Yeah, and I think too, just to expand on that, like I think if you feel good, if your staff is happy, I've been into clinics where, yeah, I'm greeted from the front end, like the front end staff, so happy, you know what I mean? And then I'm guided through the clinic, so happy, right? And then I meet the doctor, like, you know what I mean? Like you want to feel good in your space so that how you feel is it's extended out. And again, that's all still part of the invisible layers of how your space should support, your practice, but also, yeah, the longevity wellness of the people who live there.
live there,
Yeah.
like, really, yeah, like,
Yeah.
that is our home away from home.
Right.
Um, Now, Jen, I want to thank you for doing this. This has been great, and I'm not interested. I don't want to cut this off anytime soon. Like, really.
Yeah.
But I do want to address, like, we discussed before we hit record. Like, you were quite hesitant, and I have to be honest, you're the most hesitant guest I've had so far.
Oh.
And and I think that's great, because it was a true sign that you cared, and you just didn't want to do this willy nilly. You really had something. But I want to ask you, like, what was the hesitation? Um, and what made you say yes? What made you agree to having this conversation today?
Yeah, my hesitation, I'm fairly awkward sometimes, especially in speaking. Again, this is easy because it's recording. It feels like you and me, but just knowing it's being recorded is awkward. But yeah, I think just I think in the past little while, I've never really been a big um, traditional self promoter in that way, and so, but then in the realm of like social media and just everything happening digitally, just I really just almost, I guess, wanted to come out and, demystify what you see either digitally, all the misinformation that's sort of out there. Um, yeah, I thought it would be a good opportunity just to share what I know. Because yeah, there's a lot of misinformation. A lot of my clients bring this to me and it's like, oh, and so I think I just kind of hit the wall in terms of like, I should speak up, right? Because I think while I wanted to be respectful, just kind of, I naturally am more introverted, so I kind of keep to myself a little bit more. At the same time, it was just sort of driving me crazy what was being promoted. I kind of felt my design partner actually encouraged me to speak out, and even though maybe I'm not um, an exhibitionist that way, that I still had value in terms of what I had to say, and being able to protect somebody from making potentially the less than ideal decision, right, on their build, their process, all those sorts of things. So that's probably why I kind of, yeah, agreed to it, I guess.
Well, and again, thank you for doing so. We discussed earlier today just like the cost of that, of mistakes in design. Again,
Mhm.
whether it's like plumbing and floors or backing in walls, like there's if a person looks at a design quote from you and someone else, like someone else might appear cheaper, might look cheaper, might be a smaller number on the bottom of the page. But again, there's so much that goes into it that if a design process runs long because it wasn't scheduled properly, like you say, like source materials being sourced, whether that's locally or overseas, and arrival timelines. If you all of a sudden the practice isn't ready to open, but the fixturing period is over, and also the doctor's paying rent. Well, that is essentially makes that design process way more expensive than if it was able to run on schedule.
Right. Yeah, you either pay for it in time, scope, or money. So don't forget that they're all tied. You make a move on one thing, you're going to sacrifice the other. um that's just life.
Yeah.
Not even design or not, right? Like, and so one thing I just sort of wanted to preface to in response to that is I'm just looking at my own personal Instagram right now, but I reposted something a couple of years ago where it's like, if you think it's expensive to hire a professional, wait until you hire an amateur. And so you don't want the person practicing on your space, right? And so this is something that it's yeah, like you say, it's your work home. And so I think that's something that has always sort of resonated with me, right? A lot of people will just be like, well, here's your fee. And it's not to say that, like, I'm top of the chain or anything like that, but I think just understanding what that number is, right? Is there going to be an inspection? Is that right? Like, is there, not all numbers are created equally, and don't be lured by a cheap initial number, because that could mean something else got dropped off in the process. And touching back on good design in terms of being integrated, it's not like, oh, here's my work, now I get to hand it off. This isn't a relay race. We all take a seat at the table. And so I think being able to scrutinize, yeah, if cost is important to you, and I get that. At the same time, what am I not getting with that should be the other question, and understanding or being okay with that, I guess, right? Are you okay with that? Will anything additional cost you extra? I see a lot of that too, where it's like somebody comes in with a really inexpensive, aggressive design quote, but maybe that designer never goes to measure on site. And I've heard stories like that. Or maybe that designer will charge you for every little extra during the build while it's being built, little things like that. Just things to caution on, right? I'm not saying that my way is 100% correct, but I think just caution on what process you're agreeing to.
Well, I think a common question I get asked, by people that are looking to buy or renovate is like cost per square foot.
Mm,
And like cost per square foot, I think, and again, educated by you, is such a floating scale, because again, like what do you want to put into your fixtures and into your decor can drastically change the cost per square foot. And if that's not a priority, well then, hey, the same designer with a very, very similar floor plan can bring that same cost per square foot down a lot by, again, changing materials and changing fixtures. So
making smart decisions. And also too, like, yeah, sometimes that's a really tricky question. I get that all the time. And I can only really speak on past projects because, again, just take for instance, this week alone, the price of drywall has doubled. So a couple months ago, I could buy drywall a sheet for $38. Now it's 75.
Wow. And
There's landscapers panicking to find wood for fences and things like that. And again, this is not the norm. It's you know what we're going through globally right now. So I'm not saying that, but that's why certain things are tricky. Is again, there's a plan for design, but then there's also the logistics, right? So that comes into the logistics part. Okay, well, if that is a supply chain issue, how can we change the design in order to accommodate that? Is one question too. And HVAC, right? Like, so often it's not just an exercise of my desires for what your clinic will look like aesthetically. It's also what will the building allow us to do, right? I'm working with, I worked with a client where there was two parcels, two buildings. One building in the northeast corner had a 5-ton rooftop unit, and our building, which is in the southwest corner, had a 6-ton unit. So you got to start asking your questions, especially in the time of COVID. How is this going to meet the new HVAC requirements, fresh air, all that stuff, which is fine. Again, as a tenant, I understand you're 100% limited in that regard, but those are conversations to have with your landlord. Are you going to need a mini makeup air unit? How are we going to achieve, right? Like, and again, we're southwest, but we only have a 6-ton unit versus a 5-ton for a northeast corner. So sometimes we're limited in terms of budget of what we can do. That mini makeup air unit could cost you $5,000 to $10,000.
mhm.
That eats at my budget. And
Right.
so often, a lot of times, mechanical and electrical, unfortunately, eat up a lot more of my budget in order to meet those standards before I've even dreamed of what I'm going to put on the wall, right?
And a person who is more of an interior designer has no concept of, or very or less concept of, that infrastructure that goes into the unseen infrastructure that goes into the cost. So they could be giving a quote based on aesthetics,
Right.
finishes, materials, having no realization that the HVAC might need to be addressed, or some other aspect of mechanical that might need to be addressed, that you are quoting on when you are looking at the space and trying to figure out what's the best solution for the client.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, and that's the thing. I mean, sometimes I get calls where it's just like, okay, I want to build 2,000 square feet. What's my cost? It's like, whoa, wait a minute. Well, what building are you in? Or where are you? Or like, there should be way more. But again, I think somebody with the right amount of experience should know what questions to ask in
Mhm.
order to help bridge the gap.
Well, and I said this to you before we hit record, but I'll say it again too, because I struggle with this too, in the sense that we were always told, especially as salespeople, but just as people in general, like, it's not nice to talk. If you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. And that's about your competition. That's about the kid down the street. That's if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. But I lost an equipment sale to a client at end of last year, and I gave my pitch, and I spent my time identifying needs and wants and everything else, and the price was higher. It was a different piece of equipment. They weren't apples to apples comparisons. I did not say as much bad things about the competition as I could have, but I was talking to the doctor just a couple of days ago, and this dentist was not fully regretting the decision they made, but they're definitely on the way to regretting it, and they already see the errors and the shortcomings of what they purchased. And so I'm thinking, like, so maybe if I was harder and harsher and more in their face in regards to, I'm exaggerating, but, like, more stern on my position as to why, and more negative towards the product they ended up buying, maybe I would have saved them from this discomfort they would have gone through. Yes, they would have paid more, but again, it would have been the right piece for them. And so it's tough. And
Mhm.
so I in my own kind of way, I recognize the struggle that you have. But and I respect the concern that you have to, like, to say and to be more forward. But I think, hey, look, the time I've known you, amount I've learned from you, I think you have every right to stand up and speak and get on your
Well,
soapbox, because too often I find in life, not just in dentistry, but in life, is like, it's who steps on the soapbox first, who's the loudest, and if they can drown out their competition, they become the expert. And there's a lot of people, products, and services that get pushed aside just because the people that know more that know best and have the best product or service just aren't as vocal for whatever reason. So
Yeah, no, and I think probably being in sales and design, right? Like we're trying to move away from like our negative stereotypes maybe we grew up watching. A friend of mine actually, I'm sitting in my home office right now, so I have like while it looks clean back here, up here, I've got all these things, all these reminders of like where I've been, and to speak to maybe how you're feeling about the doctor that you're working with there, and for potentially you and I in terms of like how to be gracefully assertive to ensure that the knowledge that the experience and knowledge that we have is carried forward in a professional way. A friend of mine gave me a card, and a dear friend of mine, she knows just how I am. And so this card says, work for a cause, not for applause. Live life to express, not to impress. And don't strive to make your presence noticed, but just make your absence felt.
wow.
So I think,
Yeah.
yeah, and again, I'm here, and I think for me it was a qualification, like, oh, I don't feel qualified to talk, oh, like I in my head, even though I've been practicing for 22 years, I'm still kind of like a kid, right? So I was like, well, who would want to hear what I have to say, right? And so, and that's often how I felt, is just like, yeah, just kind of do your thing with that as much passion and integrity, whatever is suited for the time, and slowly I'm learning how to. I guess be assertive so that everything that I've learned is of value to more people.
Well,
So
hey,
maybe
shameless plug here. The dental world needs more Jen Buchanan. So,
thanks,
um,
Bob.
no, so get out there and let's get it done. Hey Jen, anything else that you wanted to touch on that we haven't discussed today? Like this has been fantastic. I really appreciate it. Your openness, your honesty. Anything else you wanted to kind of get out there before we kind of call it a wrap?
Uh, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I think at the end of the day, just every space is unique. And so if anyone is, a self-proclaimed professional or whatever, I think sometimes that should just raise, yellow, red flags in your head, like, okay, well, why? And just ask more questions, right? I think the people who have the proper answers aren't afraid of that. And so I think that's one thing. And yeah, and just yeah, it's exciting. I love what I do, and who I do it with, and we always hit bumps. We really do, but just being able to get through them is satisfying. I had one doctor kind of say to me, one of the most satisfying things that he said was just it was a dermatologist that I had worked with recently, and he said, in his quote unquote, he said, as time passed since our project's completion, I have only come to appreciate how these design details complement the function of our daily routine. And so yeah, so it's not always just about a number in terms of, yeah, sometimes
um,
you pick your adventure.
I think that's and it ties back to what was the other saying? Good design is invisible until it's not.
Yeah. Yeah, so for sure that's a good closer, right? Just to reiterate. So Bruce Mao, and I'll email this to you, Bob, so you have it.
Please do.
Design is invisible until it fails.
Design is invisible until it fails. Hey
Yeah.
Jen, where can people find you? Facebook, Instagram, social media, what email address, website? What are your details?
Yeah, so Instagram is at jbiddesign. And website is jenniferbuchananid.com. Those are great places to start, and I'm always open to opening conversation. Yeah, so I
All right, so
appreciate
what I'll do
you.
is I'll include all those links in the show notes or in the email that I send out. And anyone
Cool.
has any questions for Jen, please reach out to her. Or if questions to me, I can forward to Jen by all means. But hey, Jen, thanks so much for doing this. I really
Thanks,
appreciate
Bob.
it. And hey, have a great weekend, okay?
Yeah, you too. Enjoy the sun.
Okay, bye for now.
Okay, bye.